Welcome to my channel on mindful reality. Today I'm going to continue talking about the word doing and get a little deeper into it than my last episode. It's a word that we are all just so familiar with, and it generally implies, it generally implies a should thought. But that's only when we're thinking about it in that way. Obviously, the word doing just tends to imply actions. But the way we think about actions coming out of our body or our mind is different than the way I talk about it in this work. And I think I should start there. It feels like doing, meaning our actions, if that's what we are referring to, comes out of the mind. And really the mind is just a word that we tend to refer to when thinking about thinking or thoughts or what people refer to as consciousness. And it isn't really clear how this way of considering the word doing would come from the mind. It's true, we are thinking all day long about various things and desires and things that we wish to happen or we hope to do in the future. But even as I say it, and especially if I say it slowly, things we want to do, that would imply an execution of an action. And when we think about it, and even when I speak about it in this casual manner, there's a sense that that doing comes from the mind. And if you break it down, that would mean that somehow the desire to do something has to be translated from a thought. I want to do something. I want to take a walk today. Let's use that as an example. I want to take a walk. I hope I do that. I want to do that. I want to make myself do that somehow. And if you think about what's going on here, there's an assumption of a cause and effect relationship between thoughts and action. Now, this is one of the most intuitive elements of our existence as humans that exists. And I talk about this especially in my first book, Body Over Mind, A Mindful Reality Check. And I come out arguing against a relationship, a cause and effect relationship between thought and action, the way that we generally assume it to be. And that sounds crazy. And I'm going to describe it a little bit. So we are somewhere in our house or in the car or outside, existing physically, occupying space somewhere. And generally speaking, we are having lots of thoughts that are passing, coming and going. If you are somebody who has ever meditated in a way of watching your thoughts come and go, there's an awareness that there's just this background hum of thoughts. Those are thoughts, right? I mean, in my work, I use the word thought to basically refer to any kind of messaging that's going on in what we refer to as our mind. So for me, thoughts include feelings, emotions, ideas, goals, intentions, opinions, judgments. And I say that because really we're just talking about some kind of messaging of language, whatever the language is that we happen to speak. Because of course there's other kinds of messaging that goes on in our mind, maybe imagery, pictures, scenes. But so I'm just going to use this umbrella term, thought, to mean any kind of messaging that's going through what we refer to as our mind, or other people might say, in our consciousness. And so there we are somewhere occupying space in our day, having a bunch of thoughts. And some of them might be, I hope I get to do such and such, or I really want to do such and such. And again, there's sort of an assumption in there that there is a way to, well, first of all, that there's someone in our brain or in our body that has a way to take the thought and turn it into an action. This is the most intuitive thing felt, and I argue against it in all of my work. That first of all, as you can go back to my last recording, which is called Action versus Doing, I describe the difference between what I refer to as doing and action. But in addition to that, and I will review that here, in addition to that, there's just the issue of assuming that there's a mechanism or a tool that we, which I'm going to argue that doesn't really exist anyway. That's just language, but there isn't really a self, as Patricia Churchland, who is a neurophilosopher, will say there's no neural self in the brain. But it feels like that. But so there's no mechanism in the brain that can take a thought and turn it into a bodily movement, which is really all we can ever think about with the word doing. It's an action. That's what we're referring to. Like, I want to take a walk. So, or I want to make myself take a walk. Somehow we're going to put this into action, a thought, a desire, a want. And it's all very tricky because we are all day long having these thoughts. Now, I'm going to present something else that's also happening all day long that we are not generally aware of at all. Because our focus generally tends to be on this thought train that consists of all these things we desire or fear or regret or just generally are analyzing with a lot of commentary. And again, the we is a whole other topic, which I won't get into here, but it's a projection in the brain that we call the mind of all these thoughts, and there is a self at the center of all that. That's for another episode. But there is a feeling of, so the person is existing somewhere, occupying space, and they're having a train of thoughts going by all day long. But the other thing that's going on all day long is that the body, when I say the body, I mean the entire organism from head to toe, all the time, right? That is the whole body. The whole organism is always, by default of physically existing, by default of the fact that we physically exist, we are always in a physical activity, which is what I would refer to as an action. Standing, walking, sneezing, cooking, working, talking, whatever it is. It's the body, the organism that's in the action. Now, that is something that is also a train. It's a stream of physical movement that's going on the whole day for our entire life. Even when we're sleeping, we're lying in the bed or wherever we're sleeping, and that's the action, right? You're lying down and you're sleeping. So, but the thing is that we are mostly only aware of our thought train. And as part of that thought train, there's this assumption that there's a we at the center that can take the desire and turn it into a bodily movement, because the only thing we could ever call an action is happening by the body. It's the only tool to actually be inside the action. If you want to take a walk, if I want to take a walk, it's my legs and my body that are walking. And so the irony is that all day long, forever, when we are alive, we are in some action already and always. And you can see it. And there's no way for it to not be happening if it's happening. And you see yourself in it while it's happening, which I discussed in my last episode is sort of after the fact, because if you can look at it, it was already happening. But that's sort of, more detail than I need to go into here. But the point is, let's just assume it's happening, and you can only find out it's happening while it's happening. You see yourself in it. Now, 100% of the time that we are alive, every millisecond of our existence, our body is in some activity. We don't think of activity this way. We don't think of action like that because we identify with action through this thought process that is about doing. And it feels like, at least to me, it feels like there's some element in the mind, whatever the mind is, that can kind of ooze out into the environment and make this thing happen that we want to happen, that we're picturing in our mind. So when we're picturing it, yes, it's us that we're picturing taking the walk, but we're picturing it like a story. Byron Katie discusses stories very well in this way of imagination. So if I'm picturing myself, I want to take a walk later, I hope I do that. I want to make sure I do that. Is like I'm picturing it, right? There's little me out in the woods taking a walk. But in reality, all day long, regardless of anything I'm thinking about, even if I'm not thinking in any given moment, I am in an action already. Like right now, I'm sitting on the floor talking into the recorder of my phone, making this recording. And so the actions are already happening. There's already this physical stream of action that in my first book I talk about a lot, that it's in the way. It's already happening. And you only have one body, and it has to be a whole, and it can't be divided, and it can't split into pieces, and it can't be in the future before it's the future. So there's always just this one organism from head to toe, and it's already always in an action. And so there isn't room for another action. Now, someone might say, well, this is ridiculous because obviously right now you're doing that, but later you could take a walk. And that's true if it turns out that I happen to see myself later taking a walk. I might be planning and hoping all day long to take a walk and, or even that I'm going to take a walk at 5 o'clock, and then 5 o'clock might come and I might notice that my body in fact was doing something else. And again, you can look at your whole life through thoughts. This is not replacing that in terms of, if you look at it this way, it makes this happen. And if you look at it this way, it makes this happen. That's not what my work is about. My work is saying that one way or another, your body is in the space all day long for your whole life in some stream flow of physical activity. But when you get back to this word doing and the way it feels like you can somehow take a thought and turn it into a bodily movement, there really isn't a mechanism for that. People use words like intention. Well, if I set intentions and I have a goal and a plan, again, that's a mental story that's part of our thought process. And I tend to not connect that thought process with our physical actions. And I know that's extremely unconventional. And again, I'm going to save that for something else, which if you read my books, you will learn about how I approach that. But because I separate the two functions in the same way I would say, well, the organism exists and it's blinking and it's swallowing and its heart is beating and it's breathing. All those things are happening at the same time, but they're separate in a way. Yes, there's an organized wholeness into the coordination of the organism all the time, but just like we think of blinking and swallowing as separate functions, I say thinking and action are two separate functions. That all day long, there are thoughts going through this brain. And all day long, that whole physical body is in some kind of status. And that status, if you make a sentence, is always in action. So it's already happening. It's always happening. And in my opinion, we don't need to pay attention to our thoughts to get the answers about what we're going to do and how we're going to spend time. We can just look at our body. And you might say, well, what about desires if you said you wanted to take that walk? Well, in my opinion, it's about luck in the sense that if I end up taking that walk and it was something I wanted to do, then I'm lucky. And I'm not saying there aren't brain processes going on behind the scenes that are making all that happen. That is the way I see it and what I have learned through my studies in cognitive science and neuroscience, which is also for another episode. But what it's attributed to is that there are just these automatic brain processes that are making decisions behind the scenes. And the thought process we're having that feels like this conscious mechanism that's going on is also behind the scenes. And so we have a story going on that's being produced by one part of the brain, and then we have the actions that are going on, which we don't have to understand anything about science to know that all you have to do is look down at your body in any given moment, or touch your bones, or acknowledge with a mirror, or however you would know that you are physically in the space, and identify for yourself what that action is, and knowing that you don't need to focus on your thoughts to make yourself be in the space, in an action, and in a continual state of activity. So action is ongoing just via the fact that we never disappear from the space, and we are always physically occupying some space. And whatever that happens to be, if you make a sentence around it, I'm standing in the kitchen cooking dinner, I'm walking out the door, I am talking into the phone. So I'm going to leave it at that. Today I've touched upon various things here, and I appreciate you going on this ride with me. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.